Fake sip, wasn't very good acting, but a real mug. And why am I holding this mug? Well, it's my game day mug and it says run the option. That's the first reason. Second reason, I need all of you to grab your mug. Why is that the case? I need you to use it to hit the like and subscribe button. No, I'm just kidding. But you still can also do that. I just had to throw that in there. The reason I got this mug is because we are all drunk on the Kool-Aid or the Rhule-Aid, and with very good reason. There's a reason for skepticism. There's a reason for hesitation. We have been burned in the past as a Nebraska fan base. However, I'm going to go into a little bit of why Matt Rhule is different. And we hear Matt Rhule is different, but we don't really break down a lot of the philosophies and a lot of the differences between him and the previous staffs, because what we hear is a lot of the same stuff, a lot of the same approach to how they want to rebuild the program. But the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the details. And what Matt Rhule is doing is he's paying attention to the details. What did Scott Frost not do that everybody said when he left that he didn't do? It was the kindest way they could have put it. He didn't put attention to detail. Well, we're going to get into a little bit of Riley, Frost, and then transition over to Matt Rhule and get into a little bit of what went wrong with those guys and their recruiting styles and what Matt Rhule is doing differently that is going to set this team up for future success and long-term success. And we talk about that foundation building. Well, you're going to get to see a little bit of what that is and what that means when we say that. Now, my name is Justin Adams. If you're new here, I'm the host here at Nebraska Football at the Voice of College Football. I also create content for the channel. So if you like what we're doing here, please consider liking and subscribing. If you like what we're doing here, also please consider commenting on the video. Let me know your thoughts and what you think about the video content, what you want next, and your overall thoughts. So let's dive into this a little bit. Okay, so when I'm talking about the differences in philosophies, right? And what we heard the coaches talk about when they came on board. Okay. Mike Riley, when he came onto the team, right? He was, one of the old issues that Mike Riley was presented and recognized. There's a lot of issues in recruiting in state in Nebraska that he foresaw. The stigma that we always hear of Nebraska, of people in the outside thinking Nebraska is a bunch of cornfields, et cetera, not realizing that Omaha and Lincoln are a city just like any other. Now, back when Riley was a coach, he was talking about the seniors having to wait to take the official, or the high school players having to wait to take their officials until they were seniors in high school, well, to at least have the cost covered. Otherwise, it comes out of pocket for them. Okay. And so, what that essentially meant was if they weren't able to get these kids on campus, in their junior classmen years and their underclassmen years in high school, then it was going to be much harder to transition those guys and recruit them to Nebraska because, some of these guys, sophomores, juniors in high school, making their decisions. Also, when they're a senior, let's say Nebraska hasn't built that connection. They don't know what's out at Nebraska. Well, what if Nebraska is not on their short list of places to visit? And that is one of the issues that they ran into a lot. Additionally, Mike Riley's primary areas, were besides Nebraska, he really thought he had a foothold in California. So they considered California a secondary location, which still I don't think was the right move, but we'll get into that a little bit. The primary areas in which he likes to recruit: Colorado, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, so on and so forth. I will say nowhere on that list is Texas. Nowhere on that list is Florida. Okay. Now, Cali, again, was a secondary considering his relationships and connections. Where I think he went wrong was he already had made progress there, right? But progress there is not enough to out-recruit some of those schools within the state, USC, UCLA, et cetera. So at that point, his decision not to double down and really go after the top people and athletes in the state of California was his ultimate demise. He was not able to get the top players out of the state that he wanted them the most. And then it seemed whenever we did get a player out of California, something would happen, which was also a trend under Scott Frost. Now, without spending too much time on Mike Riley's philosophies, We'll transition over to Scott Frost's philosophies, okay? And, when Frost came over, there was a few things that he did and said that were a little, different, right? So when he was coming over from UCF, we know he brought his assistants over from there. The reason why he said that was the case was because he said he didn't think it was right to not at least offer them to come over. And he said if they can do that at UCF, they can also do that here. Okay. And so when he brought his assistants over from Florida, he brought those guys that recruit those same areas, recruit that same mentality, recruit that Florida area very heavy. And we knew that Florida was going to be a big part of his recruiting. Okay. Now, he said, what we're going to do is we're going to not go out and necessarily shoot for the 5 stars. He said, 5 stars outplay 3 stars in a lot of cases. However, that mentality is wrong because you still should target those top guys. He wanted to build a program of development, which is fine, right? However, his foundation was never there. Mike Riley's foundation was never there. And when we talk about a foundation, when we talk about program building, this is what we're talking about. And I'll show you this in just a second when we get into the nitty-gritty details of what Matt Rhule is doing differently. Okay. Now, Frost came in heavy-handed in the state of Florida. He worked early there. He worked hard there, initially getting headway, and it worked. It worked initially. He had 8 players from the state of Florida in his first class in 2018. So the headway he was making there was very good. Okay. Now, what went wrong in Scott Frost's philosophy? Okay. Well, in 2021, 7 signees had transferred or been kicked off the team from the state of Florida. In 2018, 2019, and 2020, 7 of those players that were recruited in those classes had transferred or been kicked off the team, and 2 never made it due to academics. Okay. So what does that mean for Frost? In 2018, 8 players from the state of Florida. Okay. Now let's look at the other states. 3 from the state of California, 3 from the state of Texas, and 2 from the state of Alabama. Okay. Now let's move over into 2019. 5 players from the state of Nebraska, which tied his most of any of his classes. 5 from the state of Nebraska, now 4 from Georgia and 3 from Arizona. 2 different states there in the second and third. 2020, 8 from the state of Florida. Now notice in 2019, not many players from the state of Florida. 2020, 8 from Florida, 2 from Alabama, 2 from Kansas, 2 from Nebraska. Okay. Florida, Bama, Kansas. Again, Kansas not mentioned yet. Bama only mentioned in 2018 with 2. So there's the only consistent state thus far that he recruited out of. Now, the 2020 class in particular. Now let's go ahead and start to see where these cracks and chinks in the armor come in. Okay. 5 of the 6 signees in that 2020 class from the state of Florida transferred out within the year. 2 of them before they even got there. Okay. Now we move over to 2021. Now Florida's nowhere to be found. You have 5 from the state of Nebraska, 3 from the state of Georgia, 3 from the state of Iowa, 2 from the state of Texas. No consistency in the location that he was recruiting or the talent that he was recruiting, and didn't have the ability to keep them there. Okay. The 2021 class had 1 Florida signee, and, Frost tried to transition over to get some more Nebraska players. And, he got 5 in 2021 and 5 in 2019. So you thought maybe he was starting to register that he really needs to focus on the 500-mile radius. Okay. Well, let's fast forward to 2022. The 2022 class, 3 from the state of Georgia, 3 from Louisiana, 3 from Nebraska, 2 from Minnesota. So again, just another class where you don't see Florida, but all of a sudden Georgia sneaks in the mix. Louisiana sneaks in the mix. Nebraska's in there, and then Minnesota sneaks in the mix. Now, I say that to say this. Scott Frost left Nebraska very, very thin in each of his, years. As it progressed, the depth got a little less and a little less. Now, putting it this way, from the 2019 cycle until Scott Frost left, 54 players transferred out of the Nebraska program. 54. Okay. In 2019, 2020, and 2021. Like that is 54 players because this was as of 2021 when these numbers came out. So 54 players had transferred out. Now, let's first focus on the 500-mile radius. Okay. Now, from 1983 to 1990, 55% of Nebraska's recruits came from state of Nebraska, the 500-mile radius. 33% from 2008 to 2015. Okay, so 55% from 1983 to 1990. And then from 2008 to 2015, 33% from the state, from the 500-mile radius. That dropped to 13% under Scott Frost. 13%. Okay. Matt Rhule right now, 32%. Okay. So Matt Rhule already making headway in that regard. Matt Rhule has 16 players from the state of Nebraska between his two full cycles. Scott Frost had 16 in his entire tenure at Nebraska. Okay. When we talk about foundations, that is the players you're talking about. The players who grew up in this state, the players who love this state, the players who don't have ties necessarily elsewhere. So they don't have to worry about being close to family, or if something comes up, having to transfer out for this, that, and the third. You know, they're able to get their families to the games. That is the foundation of a team that we're talking about. Now, Matt Rhule doesn't only focus on, the state of Nebraska. Matt Rhule is very, very, very heavy in the state of Texas. And looking at Mike Riley's classes, looking at Scott Frost's classes, Texas wasn't a focus. Texas barely had recruits during the Scott Frost era. So Texas being one of those states that Nebraska utilized as one of its main pipelines when it was successful in the Big Ten, and losing that as a pipeline really, really has hurt Nebraska over the years. So when we talk about foundation, we're talking about building up from that 500-mile radius. Okay. Now, looking over into the state of Texas. Okay. What has Matt Rhule done differently? What is it that Matt Rhule's doing besides having coached in the state of Texas? There's a lot of nuance to what he's doing, right? If y'all remember correctly, Bob Wager he's still on the staff in Nebraska, but he was a successful head coach or a high school head coach in the state of Texas. 26 seasons before coming to Lincoln, 206 wins, 100 losses, and one tie, however that works. But he helped develop a lot of college football players while coaching high school football. And one of those was Myles Garrett, the number 1 overall pick. We all know Myles Garrett, right? So Bob Wager was brought on to the staff. Why? Because he has connections in the state of Texas, right? He can do some work in the state of Texas while Matt Rhule, if Matt Rhule's tied up somewhere else or they can't get assistant coach out there, he is also working those connections, building those relationships for Matt Rhule and helping facilitate these, right? And we've seen that pay dividends. We got the number 1 athlete in the state of Texas on the campus, and it was a great experience for him. He loves Matt Rhule. He loved what he saw from the fan base, the atmosphere, and he actually got a little bit of momentum in the predictions on On3 to come to Nebraska. Now, do I think he will ultimately end up at Nebraska? I think it's a little bit lofty for me to assume that. I do think that battling Texas for him and Texas A&M is going to be a little tough. But the fact that the number 1 athlete in the state of Texas come to Nebraska and Nebraska is making waves with him in the recruiting front just shows how quickly the dividends of recruiting the state of Texas pay off. Now, what does the state of Texas have to do with the foundation, right? Well, again, you have ties to Texas on the staff. You have, coaches that have coached in the state of Texas, coaches, from the state of Texas. So when you're talking about building a foundation, the 500-mile radius is useful to an extent, right? You can only get so many players out of that area. eventually you have to dip your toes into some of these, more talented, bigger talented states. So you have your foundation with the Nebraska kids, and then you start bringing these Texas players on, right? But it's not one of those things where you're hitting Texas when it's convenient, or you're hitting Texas this year, and your entire focus is on the state of Texas. Scott Frost focused on the state of Florida only. And when he stopped being able to recruit a lot of guys in the state of Florida, and or when those schools got a little bit better in the state of Florida, and recruiting got a little tougher, he wasn't able to pull those guys out of the state of Florida and keep them in Nebraska. He also recruited, fairly heavy in the state of Arizona, but very limited talent, right? So you got to go get these guys from the state of Texas, from the state of Florida, which he did. However, like I said, there was no secondary option for him. Nebraska, Texas, and Florida. That is Matt Rhule's focus. Scott Frost had Florida. Okay. There's our foundational difference. That's why Scott Frost lost 54 players over the course of his time there. Now you look at Nebraska under Rhule so far. Post spring game, expecting some transfers out. We got Chief Borders to transfer out, which in it hurts, right? Like, we didn't want to lose Chief Borders, but a lot of what Matt Rhule was saying, Damon Benning, I believe, was one that said this. Matt Rhule, when he was telling positive things and saying positive things about Chief Borders in the offseason, and specifically mentioning him, this is nothing to say that he wasn't making progress and he wasn't one of the top guys in spring. I still believe that. However, one of the reasons that Scott Frost was specifically mentioning him so much that this came out, that came out about this, the reason why he was doing that was to help Chief Borders be able to find another school, to be able to elevate his name up, to help him, look good in the eyes of other schools, which, again, he's a really good player. However, just at a really deep position, that edge rusher position, there's a lot of talent there, and him being a redshirt senior, he wants to go somewhere where he can make an impact. He wants to go somewhere where he can put up numbers, and he probably wants to go somewhere where he can be the guy. And, this was expected to happen. We're going to lose some people. However, we haven't even lost as many people as I anticipated, or even Matt Rhule anticipated. And this is further proof of the foundation being built here, and that is necessary for sustained success. We talk about what Dion has going on over at Colorado, right? And the reason why that is a house of cards is because, and you see it, how many players are transferring out. I believe last time I checked, at least 33 players had transferred out and 31 had transferred in this year. 33 had transferred out. Okay. How are you supposed to develop and sustain success when you're losing that many players? You're not a unit. There's no cohesion. What is one of the things we hear the most out of recruits that are coming to visit Nebraska, players at Nebraska, and even coaches? Relationships. Building relationships. What did Matt Rhule build in, or what did he do to kind of, the fact that you can't get him out there for official visit or whatever? What would he do in that instance? Well, Elite Junior Day. He brought a bunch of recruits out for that weekend. If y'all remember, big laundry list of recruits that weekend. What was that for? Well, it was a camp to get them out there, but also it starts to build those relationships, right? Instead of just being like, oh, we can't get them out of campus until their senior year. Let's find ways to work around this. Let's hire high school coaches from the state of Texas who can, build those relationships for Nebraska. That way they get an early jump on these guys. Because what have we seen? We've seen a lot of these guys that Matt Rhule has previously either offered or had a relationship with, that when they leave a school, Nebraska is one of the schools they're thinking of and or go to because of that relationship, because they see the authenticity of what he's building. They see the authenticity of the staff. They know that this staff focuses on play, but most importantly, building young men, right? And they want to grow within this, this program. And coaches want to grow within this program too. He talked about Coop being offered twice the pay to go somewhere else, and he stayed at Nebraska. It doesn't only work with the players. You see Tony White. Tony White was one of the top candidates for the UCLA job. He's a UCLA alum. He ended up staying at Nebraska, right? So it's not only in the details of the recruiting, it's in the details of what he's doing with the staff. He is making all the right moves to be able to lay the groundwork. And this is the reason why he thinks this team is turning a corner, because year one is all about, just kind of start to get your people in there. Okay. Year two is where you really set that foundation up and develop those guys from the previous year. And year three is where you start to add on to that foundation and put it all together. And that what has led to Matt Rhule being a program builder. This isn't something that people just throw out there, because he turned around a couple programs and now they just call him a program builder, and people are like, oh, he's done it twice, but then he never stayed, all this other stuff, right? But as a program builder, he's doing everything that you need him to do. The reason why he was able to turn Baylor around and when they were dealing with the death penalty, essentially, was he went in there and he was still able to, build connections and was still able to recruit his first year there, the third best recruiting class in the Big Ten. And then the next years there, Big 12. And the next 2 years there, the fourth best in the Big 12. That is with a laundry list of all the stuff that was coming down on Baylor. And you saw what he was able to do at Temple. Just recruited classes like they hadn't had at Temple before. Now, there's a method to the madness. Why did Rhule come in here and say, I'm going to do things the way that I've always done them, but mold to modern college football? This is the reason. What we're seeing take place now behind the surface, we focus on the play, we focus on, the big names and the recruiting, that they're bringing on a campus, and we could sit here and talk about those guys, but we will get into those more. And I've talked about them in the past, but what is really at the root of what is making these moves happen? What is facilitating this? What is the snowball? The snowball is Matt Rhule more than anybody. Mike Riley said this. Scott Frost said this. They both said that you need to have a foundation and focus on the 500-mile radius. Well, why did neither one of them do it? If it was the recipe for success, why is Matt Rhule the only one implementing it? If you look at what Matt Rhule does, he likes to take an ode back to old Husker teams, bringing in Tom Osborne and talking about those teams and always bringing up Devaney and all those guys. He knows what worked. And again, 55% of Nebraska players from 83 to 1990 were Nebraska kids. 13% under Frost, 32% under Matt Rhule. Not only that, Matt Rhule's recruiting Florida better than Scott Frost did. He's having players stay more than Frost did. He's recruiting numbers in Florida a little less than Frost did, but who cares if you net the players, if your net turns out more, because those players aren't leaving, right? So what we continue to look for here, and what is a key that you can look out for here, is look at the offers coming out for the classes, right? You'll see Nebraska at the top, usually Texas and Florida second and third. Whereas Scott Frost, no consistency. You had offers just spread out. He was chasing players more than he was a foundation, as much as he didn't want to say it. And he was chasing those dreams in Florida, right? And at a certain point, you're not at UCF anymore. You are going to have to out-recruit those schools to be able to compete in Power 5, or to be able to compete against the big-name schools. You can't just go in there and be like, oh, we'll chalk it up to 3 stars. Now, Matt Rhule's 3 stars are a little bit different. Matt Rhule focuses on athleticism. He doesn't necessarily focus on what you can do skill-wise, because that can be developed. He focuses on athleticism. What does your film show? And do you have an athletic background? Do you have athletic lineages? Are you a dual sport athlete? That's what he focuses on. So the 3 stars that Matt Rhule goes after versus the 3 stars that Scott Frost went after were even more so a methodical approach and a planned attack. It seems Scott Frost would just have to get players in to fill the gap of the Florida guys. And it often seemed like second, third options. And the guys that we would get, at the top necessarily wouldn't produce or stay there, or, Scott Frost wouldn't develop them. So that is why there's a lot of reason for excitement in Nebraska. That is why when people ask, what is different about Nebraska under Rhule versus anybody else? It's this curse that they talk about. But if you think about it and iron out the details, it's not a curse. They just weren't doing the right things. It's as simple as that. And if you're not doing the right things to build a program, and if you're not doing things consistently and there's not a structure, you're going to fail. Simple as that. Well, that'll do it for me here, guys. I hope y'all enjoyed that breakdown of, I just wanted to go a little bit molecular into detail to see just some of these things that you can cling on to that give you a little hope that this is different than the past. And it is very much so. And the inner workings of way this has worked so far, and some of the hires that he's made and a lot of the emphasis he put on recruiting, it's paying dividends. So again, if you like what we're doing here, please consider liking and subscribing. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and drop your comments. Let me know what you think, and I will see you on the next video. Peace.